Engage Tech Limited. Hi, Georgia.
Hiya, how are you?
Very good, thank you. All the better for chatting to you today. We have Chris Doige, Head of Delivery at Engage Tech Limited. Hello, Chris.
Hello, mate.
And Amy Cook, Global Development Director at Lead Forensics. Hi, Amy. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much. So just for our audience, we'll be using the chat function throughout this webinar. So if you do have a question, pop it in there. And if we have time at the end, we will get around to it. But let's jump straight into this, shall we? So, guys, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing SDR teams in 2023? And I think, Georgia, let's come to you first on that one, shall we?
Sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think we are coming into like a really maybe weird period that we've never really gone through before, like recession coming up, everything, but in that kind of post-COVID world still. So I think like for my team and like a lot of the teams that I'm speaking to on a daily basis, it's just like actually being able to talk to people and like talk to the prospects we want to get in touch with, right? So I think that I read this stat the other week, and at any given time, maybe only 5 to 7% of customers are in that buying mode. So catching people at the right time it's bloody tough. And yeah, SDR role, it's really, really hard. So I think for us and as managers of those SDRs, it's like, are we arming the reps with, the right objection handles for like all the economic kind of, objections that are coming up? And are we giving them the best data to go out and have those conversations that they need to have to go out and, hit their target? So yeah, I think it is quite tough at the moment. But there's definitely ways that we could look to help to arm them a little bit better every day.
I'm sure we'll get into some of those methods a little bit later, but for now, let's jump over to Chris, shall we? What do you see as the biggest challenges, Chris?
Yeah, I think Georgia makes a great point about like finding the right people at the right time. I guess in my role, a lot of the focus I have around like SDRs isn't necessarily maybe like the methods that they're using. I imagine that's their SDR managers. I think one of the biggest like challenges I kind of see coming up in 2023 is basically that the environment that the SDRs are working in. What I mean by that is like George touched on it regarding recession. Like you're obviously seeing what a lot of the big tech companies have done out there, like redundancies, getting rid of offices and things like that. And knowing from my own personal SDR career, the thing that got me through some tough times was definitely like sitting in an office, chatting to the person to the left and right of me, awful chat going on, but it kind of got me through the day. And yeah, with obviously like maybe like some cuts in spending, the removal of offices, and maybe like the removal of that like amazing environment that I know SDRs can create. Yeah, it's probably something I'm maybe concerned around for SDRs in 2023. There's like loads of technologies obviously that are out there now that you can still kind of create that remotely, but it's definitely maybe something away from like I guess the data or things like that. Maybe a bit of a separate point that I think is definitely going to be a challenge in 2023.
Yeah, I do fully understand what you mean. I mean, as much as, remotely, I mean, we're all remote now, right? But nothing does beat that sort of everybody coming together and being in the same physical space. Genuinely, I do think that probably helps teamwork a lot.
For sure.
Amy, anything to add on that yourself?
I think they summed it up really well. I think just, I suppose the channels that we're using, cold calling, and specifically gatekeepers and operators over here in the US to reach the decision makers. That's something that we've really got to train our teams well to overcome in order to have those conversations. I'd say that's the biggest thing. I think a well-trained SDR who knows the value proposition, who knows the product well, who knows the objections, you get that opportunity in front of them, and I'd be confident that they could close. I think just increasing the opportunities to have those conversations is the biggest challenge these days.
It's that age-old thing of communication, I suppose, isn't it? So how do you see the role of technology evolving? We touched on it slightly there in the previous answer, but Georgia, to come back to you, how do you see the role of technology evolving in the improvement of SDR teams?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I think a really hot topic at the moment. a huge amount of buzzwords I'm hearing right now is like automation and efficiencies, and Chris touched on it earlier around like a lot of the big tech companies making those redundancies. And yeah, I think a lot of companies are trying to lean out and look at ways that they can make their day-to-day more efficient. And yeah, I think there's a lot of day-to-day tasks that can be streamlined, whether that's using like a cadencing tool or yeah, as I said, investing in like good data intelligence to minimize the amount of time that you're going through and like sourcing through LinkedIn and trying to find people. It's, yeah, it can get pretty hard. So yeah, it's quite hard to cut through the noise, I think. But I think, yeah, there's a whole load, and I think we've probably all used it or know of a lot of the tools out there that can, you know, help cut through that noise. That would be, yeah, I think my take on that one.
And Chris, similar story to you. Anything else to add?
I think so. I think don't quote me on this stat, but there's definitely some sort of data out there around like SDRs only focusing like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40% of their time on actually like revenue-based tasks. I think for me, and there's definitely tools out there that can do this, like the engagement of data and the removal of that manual aspect of sourcing a contact and the best number for that contact, I think for me is going to like absolutely like change the game for SDRs. I've like being an SDR, I know there's loads of different things you can do, like LinkedIn videos. There's so many creative ways you can do it now that I probably wasn't amazing at when I was doing it. I was very much just the phone's probably like the most quickest like way to the goal I wanted to get to. But yeah, I think for me, removing the manual aspect of sourcing the right contact, getting the right number for that contact is without a doubt going to be the biggest game changer for me.
I do. I mean, I think, you know, George, you mentioned buzzwords and things. I do wonder how far, you know, things that are powered by AI are going to influence, you know, the efficiency of SDR teams. Amy, any ideas? How do you see the role of technology improving?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time. I think the old classic kind of going through a list or, you know, a yellow pages right back in the day and then just going down the list is pretty historic now. You know, there are so many tools for cadencing. There's so many tools for videos, as Chris was saying, you know, contact data coupled with obviously the business giving you accounts. You know, it's a really exciting time to be able to test different methods and then finding what that sweet spot is to really get the best output for the team. I know we're testing always at Lead Forensics to find out, okay, did that, you know, increase our performance by just an inch? And then once you add all those inches together. So I think it's a really exciting time for technology, and there's a lot of great companies out there that are looking to assist that prospecting, you know, structure.
Joe, do you mind if I just jump in as well there, Joe?
Please carry on, Chris.
You touched on it with that the AI thing. I think one of the biggest, I don't know whether it's wastes or like I think downfalls that I think our company EngageTech has is the amount of data we collate. We have 60 odd SDRs. The amount of data that SDRs collate on a daily basis that gets wasted is like incredible. And by wasted, I mean like it might not be necessarily useful for you right now, but I'm guarantee you there's another SDR out there that's super beneficial for. And I think, yeah, for me, development of technology is maybe the AI of just like listening to calls, gathering information that might not be useful to them and sending that like instantly to the right people. Different messages, different campaigns you're calling on, different like things like that. So yeah, whether we're able to do that short term, I don't know, but yeah, I definitely feel that's going to be just basically using all the data that we actually generate.
And making the most of it, and particularly, you know, if there was some, you know, an AI tool that you could say, okay, well, I want to look at this bracket and I want this set of information from this time period or whatever, summarize all of this and send it to me, and just send a program away and do it. I think it'd be smashing, wouldn't it?
Amazing.
What are some of the key metrics that you track to measure the success of SDR teams? Georgia, we'll come back to you on that one.
Yeah, of course. I think for us, we're like a very phone first business, which is great. I think Chris like obviously touched on it. I think it's the quickest feedback loop that you can get from a prospect. Usually on a day-to-day basis, we're like tracking conversations. Are they positive? Are they leading to good pipeline? Are they booking meetings off them, obviously? So yeah, we're constantly looking at talk time and receptiveness when it comes to prospects. A lot of that feeds into the tool that we populate to ultimately help SDR teams to go out and prospect a lot more effectively. So I think, yeah, it's just understanding, are they generating like pipeline, thinking of their future selves, to ensure that they're constantly coming in to be able to like put themselves in the best position to like book those meetings every single day. Chris might have a good take on this when it comes to like tracking and stuff as well.
Let's jump straight over to him then, Chris.
Thanks.
You're going after my job, Georgia.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think like Georgia's obviously mentioned the amount of like positive conversations, meetings booked, meetings ended, all that jazz is great. I often use the phrase, I feel like a lot of SDRs and a lot of SDR teams have loads of conversations, which is great. However, they don't have many business conversations. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of talk time, but not a lot of like end product. One of the biggest things I probably judge or measure that success of an SDR, and then obviously their team is probably at that talk time to conversion ratio. We spoke about it loads just now about the buzzwords of like efficiency and things like that, and I think the most like efficient SDR out there has an ability to like have the highest talk time to conversion ratio.
So I suppose the difficulty with that is, I suppose, you know, people buy from people, right? So maybe it takes a little bit of time to build that rapport, build that relationship. So I imagine, yeah, it can be tricky just to keep that, you know, the talk time down. But you do have to still be personable. It's a hell of a challenge, I suppose. But Amy, anything else to add on the metrics that used to track the success of SDR teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some overarching conversions that you can look at to judge the success. First thing is how many conversations are they having in a day, right? Because you can immediately then say, is that person having difficulty reaching decision makers from their data or not? The second thing is then their close rate. So from those conversations that they've had with decision makers, and you need to make sure that you have a clear way of marking whether it was a connection and you had an opportunity to close, or whether it was in fact a pitch where you could have closed that opportunity. They gave you the opportunity to hear your pitch and your elevator pitch. And then the second is the close rate. So for example, my target is 1 in 3 for the team. So out of every 3 conversations with decision makers, I would expect you to close at least one of those. And then I guess the kind of like calls and the talk time, that's all great, you know, they're all great tools to measure, but effectively it's how many conversations have you got, of those conversations, how many have you closed, and then on top of that, how many have actually shown up. So one of our big things is obviously you could book 20 demonstrations, but if only 5 show up, then we review the calls, because then they're probably, you know, back to Chris's point, the business conversations you're having, did you actually add any value and personalize your conversation to really have as much of an impact as you could have done to make them show up? So I would say for me there are 3 things. Are you getting people on the phone? Are you closing them down, getting them excited to book? And then did you actually make that valuable for them and their position and their business as to what their show rate is? So I'd say they're the 3 big things. And then, you know, with a cadence and the kind of success, you can track that back. So if someone's being really, really successful, you can then reverse engineer that kind of customer journey that the SDR took to see what kind of engagement, what touch points did they do to close that business. And then you can really start drawing trends like, okay, we close after the 8th call to every business. Some people, you might then review their data and they're only making 6 calls. Well, then, you know, you just open up that cadence a little bit more and you're going to get more opportunities. Or it may be the fact that they're sending an introductory email and, you know, so on and so forth.
And just to pick up on something that you mentioned in your answer there, Amy. Sorry, Amy's not feeling too good. She's got a bit of a cough, so that's why she's hanging off the end of the screen. Just to pick up on something that Amy mentioned there on no-shows, we did run a webinar last year all about how to cope with no-show. So do dig that out. Go back into Lead Forensics and see where you can find that. We appear to have lost Amy somewhere now. Hopefully she'll be able to join us again. Can the panel share some best practices for coaching and training SDR members? Who would like to take that one?
I'll go first.
Go for it, Chris.
Yeah, like there's obviously your standard methods like role plays, call listening, that I'm sure we're all like, very much aware of. I think two things that I probably have been like slightly more effective for me and the team recently. Firstly is like peer-to-peer coaching. I found it like a hell of a lot more effective having one of our like elite SDRs coach another SDR in whatever that may be, objection handling or so on. I think the reason it's become a lot more part of my like regular weekly routine is twofold. One, I think it first that builds a relationship between SDRs, builds trust. I think they're probably a lot more open to maybe saying they were wrong, they didn't know that, instead of maybe what they'd say to a manager. I think the second part of that is it then allows sometimes me to go into those sessions and one, I can help coach the SDR, but two, I can then give feedback to the other SDR who's actually doing the coaching. Maybe like it gives a bit of a 2-in-1 there. So that's probably like my first bit of maybe advice, like encouraging like peer-to-peer coaching. And then secondly, again, call listening. I got in, I think maybe because of the way I was taught, I would do call listening with someone and just listen to the whole call, which in theory, like when you're doing role plays, you normally role play we're going to role play objection handling, we're going to role play an introduction. So yeah, I've definitely changed my call listening to getting 3 or 4 calls and narrowing those calls down to like a minute section rather than just like listening through a whole call. Just super more effective. So yeah, peer-to-peer and probably changing up my call listening slightly is probably my 2 best practices so far.
I recorded a podcast on this very subject actually with Lead Forensics' own Tyler Witt, and he was talking about much the same thing about how actually it's really beneficial to listen to an effective call and listen to what was going well rather than picking apart your own calls and saying, oh, well, I could have done this better. It's actually just a lot easier to get it into your head that, you know, stay with the positive stuff. I mean, Georgia, anything to add on that on the coaching and training side of things at all?
Yeah, just I guess building on that call listening, and there's a few other points I wanted to add on. At the moment, one thing that we're doing with the team is like really digging deep into challenges and pains to really get to the root cause of like why is that person or prospect jumping on this meeting. And as you said, like we sell to people sell to people. The more we can kind of like get down into that challenge and into that emotional state, the better. Obviously it's hard to do on that like first cold call, but it's important. What we're doing at the moment is like basically pausing it when the prospect stops speaking, and we do it before like our SDR will ask a question. We basically say like what question would be a good one to ask after what that prospect's just said. And you know, we basically brainstorm all the different routes we can take the conversation, hit play and just like listen to what was actually said. So it's almost just getting them to think in that moment of like, I've just heard this objection or I've just heard this bit of information. What would be like the best response to get even more out of this conversation? And I find that like really, really helpful. We do this thing at Engage Tech where all of the senior management team basically present a book or podcast or an audiobook, whatever it may be, to the rest of the team every week. Last week I did one, and it was basically saying SDR managers who don't come prepared to one-on-ones with their team are basically just letting it down in the first couple minutes. And what I'd say, and something that our managers do quite well, is like little SDR diagnostics, map out what their data is saying, map out, listen to a couple of calls, look at their pipeline, what are they generating, and kind of diagnose any gaps in their process. And from that, you can basically map out the next couple of weeks of training sessions. So one, you're coming prepared and like are on the ball when it comes to, what we're going to double down on. And two, and I think we've probably all been there when you rock up to a training session and your manager just has, they're not prepped and you're just like, oh, all right, like, I guess I'll bring some ideas. And yeah, it's just almost like, sometimes with, I definitely know from when I was in the role, you don't know what you don't know, and you do need some direction. So yeah, I guess spending a bit of time to map out some training sessions in advance, I guess saves you time in the future as a manager, but also makes, the people you manage feel a lot more appreciated and like you've got a handle on that development as well.
I really like the idea of that exercise. Right, so what would you have said in this point? That's imagine that being very, very effective. Amy, I hope you're all recovered from your coughing fit that you just had there. Have you got anything to add on there?
I've been fine all morning, and then it would happen during the webinar.
Now, wouldn't it?
I know. No, I really liked that idea as well that Georgia just mentioned. I think my two most powerful coaching sessions that I would kind of run regularly, sometimes even daily, is team call calibration sessions, where it's not me giving the other person the feedback, it's the team saying, oh, maybe they shared a bit of great best practice, like I've been having that and I'm really glad I just heard how you overcame that, or have you thought about doing it this way? I was able to overcome this the other day from using this. And so getting peer-to-peer feedback, I think, is sometimes, it's just a different way. It's sometimes more well received than your direct manager consistently giving you feedback, but by your peers. And then I also think comparing calls. So I make a real point of, if somebody's doing something that we are, intentionally focusing on really successfully, I'll make sure I save down that call. And so I can share that back with someone that's maybe struggling with it, and then they can compare with what it is sounding like at the moment versus what actually a great example of that call does sound like. And then you can always use that as a reference point back. If that area has maybe dropped in the future, let's listen to this current call that you just did, and then let's compare that with this great example of you delivering that effectively.
Yeah, I imagine that the peer reviewing of it all and getting everybody together to work together on the problem, I imagine that's extremely helpful. Yeah, no, it's fantastic answers from all of you, so thank you very much. This is an interesting question. How important is it to align the efforts of sales and marketing teams for success with SDR teams? Do we have any volunteers to take that question first? Georgia's lost mine. Go on, Georgia.
Happy to jump in. Yeah, I'm speaking with like sales and marketing like reps every single day, and often when businesses are facing challenges when it comes to generating business or generating pipeline, it is often because sales and marketing just aren't seeing eye to eye. I think we probably would all come to the conclusion that sales and marketing being aligned and chatting to each other and communicating is obviously like best practice, and sometimes it does happen and it goes really well, but sometimes it doesn't. And yeah, I think if those two departments aren't basically best buds when it comes to this entire process, opportunities just will kind of fall through the cracks. And yeah, I think both groups can be providing such valuable insights to each other. Like sales should be going to marketing and saying, this is what we're hearing right now in the market, and this is what objections we're coming up against. So how about we create some content around this to like push out? And marketing should be like, oh my gosh, we're getting like all of this crazy, like ideas from the web, or getting a lot of hits on this type of like posts, and how about we steer your outreach this way? And yeah, I think all of those teams, they may have some friction in some businesses, but like often when they are like all aligned, that is when like the harmony and the fabulousness happens, basically.
All part of that one team mentality, I suppose. Yeah, I do understand. It can, in some businesses it might be slightly tricky to get them to align, but all the more powerful for when it does work. Chris, did you have anything to add on that one?
Not hugely. I think often, as we've not necessarily like just labeling this to sales and marketing teams, I think we probably do it in our personal lives with friends, with family, and whatever. A lot of times we all have our own opinions of what's right. and a lot of time we always think we're right. Cheesy as this is, that you ever seen Ted Lasso, Joe? You ever watched Ted Lasso?
I am a big fan of Ted Lasso. Yes, I'm
lad,
even
right.
more a fan of handsome Brett Goldstein. So
Cool. So you'll get where I'm going with it. So there's a part where he talks about like be curious and not judgmental, and I think it's just probably like something I try and get like my team to probably live by on a daily basis, of just be curious about what people are doing, and rather than judgmental. And yeah, it's probably just something I would like underpin a lot of those teams, whoever heads of those teams. Just be curious rather than judgmental. Might be a good start.
I didn't actually have, Ted Lasso coming up on my
There you
webinar
go.
bingo card, but it's applicable in real life situations. Amy, anything to add for you on that one? Aligning sales and marketing teams?
Sorry, yeah, I think the guy summed it up really well. I just think communication is key, and marketing does great at the content. Sales can use it. Sales have insights because they're speaking to a vast amount of different people that we can then tailor our marketing towards. So communication.
Absolutely, fantastic. What strategies have you implemented to attract and retain top SDR talent? Chris, let's come back to you on that one, shall we?
Yeah, this is yeah, it's really like probably a hot topic or good topic to talk about, especially given post Christmas. I think it's like very well known. I think, what is it, the 16th of January is like Blue Monday or whatever it is, and I think everyone goes away and spends time with their family over Christmas and really like reviews like what their kind of past year was like, and things like that. So I think it's definitely a topical thing. I guess that Engage Check, in terms of the retain, I think you could do loads of surface level things like great socials, ensure people are earning their commission, hitting their KPIs. Like, if you're not earning, why would you stay at a job? So I think there's like that sort of like the obvious level. I think for me, I guess a strategy, if that's what you want to call it, in place that we probably lean on is just like challenging people like pretty heavily, but in the right way. And especially, like you said, that you retain top SDR like talent. I think it's very like, as an SDR and an elite SDR, as I'm sure there's quite a few on this webinar, the job at times can definitely be like easy. And if you're great at your job, like, I think you become relatively comfortable. I think the main thing for me is challenging the SDRs and the top SDRs, that although they may be the top performing SDR within their business, as soon as you go to that next, whether that's becoming an AE or an SDR manager, or whatever it is, you suddenly be going from the best of the best to the bottom of the next pond, or whatever you want to call it. And yeah, we have, I think Georgia was going to touch on this, but I'm going to steal her point, which was, we have these things called like SDR academies at Engage Tech, where you get to a certain level and then you get into these SDR academies and you're trained on then your next role. And very quickly you realize that you may be great at booking a meeting, but you might be pretty bad at handling a conversation with an SDR who's really upset or something like that. So yeah, for me, retain is purely about challenging people. And I'll leave maybe Georgia and Amy to speak about how they attract.
Go for it, Georgia. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think attracting good talent is obviously key. Like, as Chris sort of touched on, you can have all of that surface level things, which are really good on paper, but ultimately I think people who are coming into a role or being interviewed, like, it's, the classic saying, not only are you interviewing them, they're interviewing you. So I think making sure that you are letting people know that, you've got strategies in place to invest time and energy into their future career and that development. What like training and enablement do you have for new starters coming into the role? What does that onboarding process look like? What perks, what benefits are they getting in addition to like the base role? And ultimately, I think whenever you're coming into a new business as well, like, you got to feel comfortable. You probably want someone to, you know, ask what you think might be a silly question too. So making sure that they're, like for us, we onboard like a group at a time, just so that, you know, you've got your buddies. But we also have a buddy structure in place where a senior SDR will be buddied up with someone, what we call in development. Yeah, just to kind of bounce off them. It might be talking about something completely outside of work, but it could also be just talking about how can I really level myself up here, or I'm coming up against this objection. Can you help me in this sort of spot? So yeah, I think it's kind of, they're also interviewing you, so making sure that you are kind of putting the steps in place that they feel confident going into that role, I think is like super key.
It sounds like a perfect blend of opportunity and guidance there with the academy system you've got there. That's fantastic. Amy, thoughts on you, how to retain top SDR talent?
Yeah, it's a huge topic, isn't it, for any SDR leaders, because there's a lot of investment that goes into it if you are managing an SDR group. It's a lot of work. So the first thing I think that's just essential is you need to know the criteria of a successful candidate in the position. Because I think if you're hiring the right kind of person, because maybe they're competitive, they're go-getters, you know, they're really focused on their self-development and they want to grow, naturally, if you have those right characteristics coupled with your, you know, education and teaching them the ropes, they're naturally going to thrive in a position such as SDR. So I think hiring the right people is the first point. And then the second point is anyone that's in sales, you know, wants to be in control of what they earn. So I think to retain somebody that's really good, you have to have a really clear progression structure. And then us as leaders, we have to be very clear on the expectations in order to achieve that, right? And break it down. So this is your overall target. This is what you need to achieve in this time scale. This is how we're going to work it back. This is the support I'm going to give you. This is the support that the businesses is going to give you. And this is the expectation of what you need to bring to the table. If you do all those things, you will be promoted at X with X pay rise. And I think something that I know Lead Forensics has got really right is that just clear ladder where if you want to push yourself and you want to grow, there will always be an opportunity for you to develop, earn more money, get more responsibility. But the communication is very clear as to these are the expectations, this is what comes with it, this is the resources, and this is what you need to bring to the table. So I would say that they are, you know, amongst a number of things. I think they're the clear parameters. I think when someone's unclear of what they can do or where they can get to, or they think the grass is greener because they maybe are unsure on how they could get there in their own company, that's when you get churn. And I think setting out that clear structure from the beginning when they first start, you know, you should be able to retain your talent.
I mean, you know, if you give people a goal, they're going to shoot for it, right? So it's got to be the clearest thing. Yeah, absolutely. So just a little change in tack here. My next question is actually for our audience. Would you be interested in seeing how you can leverage your sales with Lead Forensics? We're going to put a poll up on the screen right now, which is going to offer you the opportunity to have a free demo of Lead Forensics, which is software that in essence tells you who is looking at your B2B website in real time, so you can tailor your sales approach and better close those deals. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen for a few more seconds just so you could select yes please, get in touch, because you know that's what you want to do, isn't it? And then we'll come back to our panel for another couple of questions. There we go. Thank you very much. Excellent. Okie dokie. So another question for our panel then. How do you measure the impact of sales enablement tools and techniques on SDR team performance? Do we have any volunteers for that question at all, I wonder?
I'll go first on that.
Go for it, Amy.
It's a big part of my day at the moment because we're kind of like testing, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, how to kind of get those incremental improvements in the performance. There's no like, this is exactly how you do it, and some of it can be a little bit grey, but I think what's really important is What you don't do is you don't just go, right, let's trial this, let's give it to everyone and let's see how they perform. It's about taking a small group of people, maybe even sometimes 1 or 2 people that have been there, different tenures, that maybe have a slightly different approach, and then reviewing the impact that that's had versus another couple of people on the team that didn't get that same tool, and checking that. And then as you see an improvement in it, adding another couple of people on and another couple of people on until you can make a safe assumption and a safe educated decision that actually, this is having a really big impact. And you just continue on that process through measuring the data behind it. So I guess the first thing you do is you see, right, what impact is this meant to be having, and are we seeing that? So for me, that's definitely what the strategy I use.
So it's a big part of Amy's day. Georgia, Chris, any thoughts? Anything to add on this one?
Go on.
Yeah, I think it all like starts with the data. Like ultimately you can quite easily understand like the input an SDR is having, whether it's calls, emails, LinkedIn, outreach, sales off, whatever it may be, all the way converting down to like that booked meeting. And I think if you're understanding the conversion rates between all of those stages, and as kind of Amy said, like making little tweaks along the way, potentially like A/B testing between different groups as well, it's quite easy to then track those conversions again and see like where we're trying to minimize as much as possible to get that first initial interaction to that booked meeting. And yeah, I think it's for like the SDR managers out there, it's just like, 1, what are the stats that you need to be tracking first off? 2, working back and like looking at that formula to that conversion rate, like ratio, and then yeah, trialing little bits and pieces to see how we can like really minimize the gap there. And I think doing that continuously over time, you will see results.
Absolutely. Chris, anything to add that? I mean, you handed over to Amy very quickly, so I'm wondering.
Nah. Yeah, I think yeah, not huge amounts to add. I think one of the final things I'd maybe add on how to essentially measure it would be, I think that an increase in booked meetings, conversation rates, conversation quality, like changing is obviously important. Georgia kind of touched on it there, but I think the other thing for me is like the quality of that meeting and how often they're like going obviously to next stages. I know for a fact, like if someone went from booking 10 meetings one month to 10 meetings the next month, it might not look like there's a massive impact there. But say that the quality of the meetings, tier 1, tier 2, whatever that came off the back of them, I think can definitely be something that we often underappreciate. However you track that in your own way, but yeah, other than that, I think they hit nail on the head really.
Touching on your earlier points there, Chris, as well. Yeah, thank you very much. We have had a very interesting question come in from our audience. I'm just going to grab it here. I'm interested to hear what the panel think risks might be with being able to use more AI in prospecting. Does anyone have any immediate responses to that? Would anyone like to jump in and go in on the risks of AI with prospecting?
I think it depends where you're utilizing the AI, right? Like if it's necessarily like pre interaction with the prospect, I think the biggest risk you have is likely wrong information, wrong data, calling someone that isn't the person you're talking to. Like it's just not going to be as I guess maybe human verified. I think the impact post that, so after an initial interaction, and then like whether it's an information gets sent to prospects or things like that, I think you can definitely lose that personal element of the approach. My personal opinion is like I think the benefit you get from it would probably outweigh the risk, but I think there's definitely some for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the risk with all sort of aspects of AI, isn't it? Is that where it is currently now, it's very good at mimicking, a human being, but it does lose that human touch. Georgia, Amy, anything to add on the risks of using AI for prospecting at all?
just think it's maybe dependent on where you use it. I don't know too much about AI to say that it's going to be the next best thing or it's going to be, you know, destructive. But I think there's no, you know, people buy from people. So there's certain elements of the process that if you completely were to take away the kind of like personal approach could be devastating, right? But I think a lot of it around it, such as a follow-up email, such as a confirmation, a reminder, you know, there's lots of AI in coaching. You know, it can listen to a number of calls, you know, and in customer service, you know, you can have a machine that says we've had X many positive calls and X many negative calls, and these are the reasons. I think you can very quickly understand a vast amount of data from AI, but I think there are certain elements that should be left to that person having that conversation to get the deal or whatnot. But I think around it, you know, scary, but you know, it could be really positive and allow us to be just doing the parts of the role that are going to be most effective to bring in revenue. So, you know.
Yeah, we certainly live in interesting and exciting times, and hopefully we don't accidentally invent the next, you know, Skynet. Georgia, any more thoughts on AI?
I think that they've covered it all. I think start small, start with little efficiencies and build up as you go.
Absolutely fantastic. Guys, this has been a really fascinating conversation. I really want to thank you for sharing so much insight and tips for our audience here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come to each of you in turn. I'm going to ask for your absolute top tip, your golden rule when it comes to transforming your SDR teams from good to great. So let's start with Chris. What is your top tip for the audience today?
Thought you might start with me.
Would you like me to go somewhere else to buy yourself some more time?
No, I reckon I'll be right. Thanks, mate. Yeah, from good to great, my top tip. I think one thing that I probably learned most in my managing of SDRs is that you're not necessarily going to get every single SDR, and maybe you shouldn't expect to get every single person to be on the same page as you. Everyone has their own goals. Everyone has their own reasons they come to work, and I think you should accept that. I read a book called Tribal Leadership once that talked about different tiers of like teams, and the good teams are essentially teams that like are very much like I'm great and you're not, and very much like we're amazing SDRs, and normally they have some sort of like I guess like a common enemy that they're I guess fighting against. I think my probably top tip to go to a great team is a common purpose, and we touched on it earlier, but like mutual accountability, like peer-to-peer training we spoke a lot about. The ability to challenge was something I brought up, is like something which I think allows SDRs to be retained at companies because they feel that they are getting better. So yeah, my probably top tip would be create a common purpose and mutual accountability between the SDRs.
Amazing, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Georgia, we'll come to you on that. What is your top tip for today's audience?
My team will, like, I am a broken record, so they've heard this like a lot of times. My top tip is to every day you're coming in, you need to be thinking about your present self, but you also need to be thinking about your future self. Whether that's building pipeline, planning ahead, you know, even if it is someone pushes you out and says, no, give me a call in 4 months, diarize that call so you're in their diary. So that future Georgia, Chris, Joe, Amy are coming in and being like, gosh, thank God I had past Georgia, because she has like done an absolute job for me. So yeah, always think about your future self and make sure you tick off both tenses every single day.
Well, I mean, you say that, you know, to your teams you might be a broken record. That's the first time I've heard anything like that, and I'm going to take that forward, absolutely. So, Georgia, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. Thank you for your input. Fantastic. Amy, to see us home then, what is your absolute top tip?
It's really hard, isn't it, to pick one. I love the other guys' points. I think, you know, that whole team mentality is just huge. But something I really drum into the team is, you know, a really successful team is a group of really successful individuals. And I think that a lot of the times, and competition is great, right? But it's at the end of the day, it's you versus you. So if you can kind of hold the mirror up at the end of the day and say, I did everything I possibly could, because I know the impact that was going to have on me, my future, as Georgia was saying, but also on my peers, and I know I play a vital part in us being a successful team, then you're a winner. And I think just getting everybody to give it 100% every day for themselves and for the team just creates that dynamic where you might not be feeling great, you might not be having the best day, but you've got people around you that are relying on you to do your bit, and you've got to show up in that manner.
Fantastic stuff. Amy, thank you again for joining us for this webinar. Again, thanks to all our panelists for joining us for this webinar. Thank you for watching. And yeah, we'll see you for another webinar very, very soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.